My project, that's my part of the project, is looking at Griffith, which would be longitudinal, if you can say so, section of film history. Since Griffith started early and then did it, and he changed both against the wind of film history, but also using it as a tailwind. So we can actually look at those two things. And in fact, this is a project, in fact, a practical project, which we plan to put into life if and as soon we get another grant, which we applied for, National Endowment for Humanities Digital. The thing is that we have a contract with the Cineteca di Friuli of getting all the collections of 1913 and all the videos of Chaplin, of Griffith, and they had every existing print of Griffith shown in Pordenone, therefore videotaped and now preserved at the Cineteca di Friuli. Why? To make them available to everyone at Cinemetrics, to download, look at, measure, remeasure, but also test our preliminary results. So this is why Griffith. Now the question is, why going back in time? What reason? Now, this question can be answered by the question. We want to know to what extent and up to which limits shot lengths are integral to the making of films, and to whatever effect this or that film purports to produce on its viewer. It makes sense, the three of us thought, to go as far back as film history will let us and find out exactly when thinking in feet and seconds became part of the filmmaking practice and film-related talk. How long must a shot last in feet and seconds for its duration not to kill a gag, to build suspense, to grab a viewer's attention, and not to lose this attention to brevity? Now, such were the questions raised and debated loudly around the middle of the 1910s on studio sets, in cutting rooms, across trade papers and screenwriting manuals, and yes, even in Hugo Munsterberg's now famous psychological study conducted in 1916. Now, as a website, Cinemetrics was launched in 2005. So all we did was to apply digital tools to the counting method, which Barry Salt had introduced in film studies as early as 1975. But there was life on this planet before the human intelligence evolved, and it makes sense from time to time for us to revisit those who took time to count shots and seconds before Salt. Photoplays, and this is a quotation, photoplays are put on with a stopwatch in one hand and a yardstick in the other. We have a yardstick here as well. Two authors of writing the photoplay informed aspiring freelance screenwriter in 1913. So those who want to learn how to write for films should keep watching movies and watch them armed with tools. What are the tools? I quote again from this book. Make a practice of carrying a few small cards with a line drawn down the middle of each. As the card is held in the hand, enjoying the movies, mark with a pencil a short stroke on one side for every change of scene, which is shot in that language, and on the other side, a stroke for each leader, which is intertitle in that language. Letter or other insert. This will serve as a convenient record device, unquote. So that's what they wrote. And there's another piece of device which the wannabe filmmaker would find in another photoplay manual. I quote again, the experienced writer labors under handicap, and one that he could overcome in a measure. If he would take the trouble to count the scenes and note the length of them by consulting his watch, as the story is unfolded, then he's a winner. This is Catherine Carr, and she said this in 1914. Now, there should have been a grain of sense in her advice, something that explains why today, 100 years later, we're still counting shots on Cinemetrics. Now, it was to find that remote source of relevance of what we do, a time-worn kit of practical needs, as it were, which urged early filmmakers to reach for the watch as they watched each other's movies. That the first Cinemetric conference held here at the University of Chicago last year was called Enumerate Film History, a question mark still. Cinemetrics looks at Griffith, Sennett, and Chaplin, 1909, 1917. Now, not only the three of us were present, but we were lucky to procure the attention and even a paper of Tom Gunning, an expert in early Griffith in film and film history at large, a number skeptic, and a good judge in matters of relevance, of that matter. And he was our opponent, and some of his question actually generated this further research. Okay, so the strategic aim of that conference in March, of which a record, published record, you can find in the lobby. So you'll know more or less, if you want to, what it was about. The strategic aim of that conference in March was to historicize the idea behind and the practice of taking Cinemetrics measurements. The idea was obviously there. Time scenes. Oh no, it's I need to restart because it's a slogan. Time scenes as you watch films. We quoted just two photoplay writers writing manuals that encourage their readers to do this. We could quote more authors from the time giving a similar advice. Were these people crazy enough to actually put this into practice? This was just advice, rhetoric thing. Yes, there were. There were a number, and one of the earliest one was the Reverend Dr. Elias Boudinot Stockton, who conducted a study in 1912, the aim of which was to compare and assess, I quote, the value of long and short scenes. Now, to establish this, Stockton spent around 10 hours watching and re-watching one-reel and split-reel pictures exhibited at the movie theaters in New York. As an eyewitness testified, I quote, he carries a stopwatch, a pocket counting machine, an electric flash lamp, and a notebook. And he does his work thoroughly. It comes from this. Stockton's study was not entirely unprejudiced, and tendency in American filmmaker, which Stockton decided to test, which is said to have worried him a lot towards increasingly fast cutting. James. The result of Stockton's expedition was a table, this is his table, that lists the number of shots, intertitles and inserts counted for 25 titles. And almost all films, minus 3 split reel ones, as almost all of them were of more or less the equal length, 1,000 feet, roughly 17 to 15 minutes of projection, 16 or 18 frames per second. It was possible for Stockton and Sargent to calculate what they call an average shot length, average time length, for each scene. Now, the figure which started our researchers, the figure that startled our researchers really, was the incredible 68 shots squeezed into the single reel of Biograph's 1912, The Sands of D, against the average of 28 shots per reel, more typical to the rest of the studios of Stockton's list, 6 of them American and 3 foreign. To this we heartily say Amen, is how the Reverend Dr. Elias Stockton ends his Cinemetric crusade. And I quote again, a long quote from him. A 20-scene drama is run up to 15 or 60 scenes with an average time length of from 15 to 18 seconds each. Acting is not possible. Clarity of story is not possible. Unfolding of plot is not possible. Now that 3 times the proper number of scenes are used to cover up the thinness of Director Griffith on the flap of the envelope stories, everybody's doing it, and strong, vital, gripping plots are shelved in favor of the short story with the numerous shifts. So yes, and as you can see, we projected this old measurement against a newer one, and yes, The Sense of D is far from being the fastest film. So the tendency is there. He chose this week's movie to show it, but he was right. There were even worse cases in this year. All right. Now, okay. Sorry. Okay, and this is here where the pre-cutting psychologist, that is, pre-James cutting psychologist, comes in. His name, of course, is Münsterberg, and does the same thing. An experimental psychologist who can hardly establish anything and believe anything and prove anything without a watch. And it is hardly surprising that one of the first, okay, Hugo Münsterberg, I'm confused with my own marks on the typescript, was also one of the first scientists to have established the average shot length of a film. So he is the one. As early as 1915, exactly 100 years ago. And I quote from Münsterberg, if the scene changes too often and no movement is carried on without a break, the photoplay may irritate us by its nervous jerking from place to place. Near the end of the Neubauer edition, film, screen version, of Carmen, 1915, the scene changed 170 times in 10 minutes, an average of a little more than 3 seconds for each scene. We follow Don Jose and Carmen and the Toreador in even ever new phases of the dramatic action, and are constantly carried back to Don Jose's home village, where his mother waits for him. There, indeed, the dramatic tension has an element of nervousness, in contrast to the Geraldina Ferrar's version of Carmen, 1915, which allows a more unbroken development of the single action. So, fortunately, we have Cecile DeMille's Ferrar's Carmen, so we could measure her. Unfortunately, the Barra's Carmen has been lost. But thanks to Münsterberg's measurement, we can actually place the dot. And that's the real dot. And he says, no, not go above it. You'll lose the attention of the viewer. Now, such and such like were the objections raised against overcutting on the part of people like Münsterberg or Stockton. And clerics and psychologists are not people to be easily gainsaid. Now, wouldn't this be the right moment, just to be fair, if we gave the floor to the filmmaker, to one of them, specifically to Griffith, the main perpetrator of the things, to give a chance to explain. To do that, we'll leap 10 years. We're in the teens now, in the 1926, an important year in the history of cinemetrics before Salt. Earlier on, numerous critics were looking at Griffith, some in awe, some with apprehension. In 1926, Griffith himself looked at film editing through numbers and came out satisfied with what he saw. What we are talking about is a little-known essay, Pace in the Movies, unfortunately little known, and so little known that we made handouts, and it's still a pile of them is available for you there. Grab, it's a rarity. And the magazine which was published is not easily found. the Liberty magazine, published in Liberty magazine in 1926. So it was this essay, Pace in the Movie, that generated a lively discussion at the first Cinemetrics conference last March. Do words translate to numbers? Was one question. And the essay is actually written in words, though it's written about rhythm, and it says, yeah, count, look at numbers, don't be afraid of numbers. But is it really rhetorics or not? This is one question. Does slow, faster, and fastest boil down to measurable cutting rates? Does what Griffith say to a wider public, correspond to what he does on a studio set and in the cutting room, theory and practice? And is it Griffith who says this all after all? Another question. Now, what follows is a result of our additional research, to which those questions and other raised at that conference pushed the three of us. They pushed us, Daria and me, in the library to Griffith's archive, and but of this more later. First we'll look at Griffith's article, Pace in the Movies, as published in Liberty magazine in 1926. It begins with the following editorial run-up. A famous director reveals the secret of good pictures. Is it here? No, it's not here, but it's good. It's blank slide is better. Yeah, it's better than the old slide. A famous director, quote, reveals the secret of good pictures. Our cinemetric analysis of Griffith's films that was presented last year here takes this statement as read, and that was Mike Baxter who took it as read, and treats what Griffith's article says about editing as a prescription or recipe of sort. A legitimate question has been raised, however, of whether Griffith's Pace in the Movies had been written by Griffith himself. Liberty was a widely read weekly. Griffith, a widely known name in film industry. What is Griffith merely lent his signature to a staff writer with Liberty as someone from a studio publicity or someone from his own studio publicity department? After all, a much quoted interview allegedly given by Griffith in 1911 has recently been shown to be a fake. Are we safe to assume, as we do in this paper, that the secrets of the famous director reveals is really Griffith's own secret? One cannot be too cautious about a possible deal between a deadline-minded journalist and an always busy filmmaker. Now, the point is well taken. In fact, it could hardly have been taken better. Doubts voiced at the 2014 Cinemetrics conference regarding Griffith's authorship of Pace in the Movies sent the two of us in this case on an additional research, an opportunity one never regrets taking. Our initial hope was to find a manuscript or some other evidence of Griffith's hand in the Pace, no such luck. Yet, a careful look at Griffith's papers, published and unpublished, opened up new spaces for reflection on the writing of the Pace and its purported message. Daria, pardon me if I skip all the philology of it, or most of the philology of it. We didn't find the manuscript, I'm summarizing. We did find telegrams from Liberty magazine to Griffith, and Griffith's instructions to his assistants that, yes, after shooting I'll talk to Mr. Denby, and then he, okay, I'll quote just two to make sure that you do understand that Griffith either wrote it or was totally interested in this essay being published. Mr. Denby phoned to request an appointment with a part of Liberty magazine about, quote, some article they're running, and this is a serious article they're running. Great writers, great playwrights on their own work. Griffith's essay, Pace in the Movie, was part of this series. Some article they are running and in which they feel Mr. Griffith would be interested. And then, yes, a draft copy of a cable is served. I promise not to go to the philologists, cannot resist it. But it's just a little fraction of what it was.
Yeah, 10 minutes till 5 o'clock.
When you said a lot of time.
Well, yeah.
All right, I'm skipping the philology. Okay, but then what we found is an interesting motif which explains a lot. So, what is a classic motif for a filmmaker to go public with their views? Now and then. It's probably to promote a movie about to be released. Now, if Griffith had this in mind, his essay turned out to be a month late. The only film released in 1926, The Sorrows of Satan, premiered in October, and the Paysim's movie came out in November. But a different and important, a less local explanation makes a likely story of the origin of Pace. What Griffith wanted the article to do was to bolster his endangered reputation of a filmmaker rather than promote his new film. Endangered by whom or by what? Now, as it happened, the year 1926 marked the 10 years since Intolerance, Griffith's peak of fame, now eclipsed by an all-American craze for latest foreign, European and mostly German pictures. The 10th anniversary of Intolerance did not go unnoticed. In 1926, a guild, International Film Guild in New York, mounted a retrospective of Griffith's work for 10 years. But it also dangerously coincided with a retrospective on a new person, a new fad. This is Lubitsch. And then essays started appearing in film press at that time. One by the famous Griffith fan, Griffith idolizer, but also as idolizer sometimes used to be Griffith's fiercest critic. He's a fan. He wants Griffith to win. And this is the famous Seymour Stern. Now, and this is what he writes, and this essay is preserved in Griffith's archive. Everybody knows that In the Birth of a Nation has lost much, if not most, of the prestige of his former years. German technique, embodied in Deception, subsequently in Caligari, later in The Last Love, now in Variety. Foreign talent poured into America, first Lubitsch, then Strahan, then later Seastrom, later Dupont and Murnau. Griffith's failure to keep pace with the advanced and more distinctly cinematic ideas of these men. Griffith's obstinate refusal to part company with that verbose villain. The subtitle, verbose villain, the subtitle. Griffith's tragically persistent and wholly vain attempt to rival his own masterwork, The Birth of a Nation, by producing a picture along the same lines instead of trying to beat it along different lines. So Griffith is doing the same kind of old thing, but the Germans are beatable on their own fields to beat along different lines. All that contrived to turn critical as well as popular sentiment against the master. Their destination, in fact, has already for several years been applied to others, to Lubitsch, to Stockton, to Fritz Lang, to Murnau, and Dupont, and so on. Now, what could have happened to, I quote again, the genius that made of Intolerance the most awe-inspiring lesson that ever dazzled its way across the silver sheet, the critic asked. Stern verdict was Griffith's reliance on his own time-proven film-making recipe. That fails Griffith. The trouble with Griffith, he writes, is he has a formula, and true artists generally don't bother with formula. The scheme, which is known to nearly every man, woman, and child in America, is based on the pattern of the birth. It consists of a problem, a contention, an imperilement of one half of the cast, including the heroine, by the other half, and the final victory of the former half over the latter by means of death-defying riders who clatter through the alleys of Paris or through the valleys of America to the rescue. And once they said, it's all history. Films are not made this way anymore. We're in the 1920s. Now, each time Griffith resorts to the time-proven rescue formula, he gives in to Germans. That's what Stern contends. Suppose Griffith reads this, which he likely did, since this essay clipping is found in his archive, gets angry, another possibility we cannot rule out, and decides to make it known what he, David Wark Griffith, had to say about the formula and the Germans. If this is what happened in October 1927, Griffith's Pace in the Movies, published in November, sounds much like an essay thus conceived. People come to the movies for stars and stories. This is how Griffith begins. This article is not about either. It is, Griffith stipulates, about the quest that leads into the soul of movies, where there resides something that is greater than stars and stories and little tricks of the trade. That's something I have called pace. Now, what is pace? Pace is a new word to describe an idea which is old in the motion picture industry, but one which I doubt has ever been brought, at least at the way I intend to bring it to the public's attention, Griffith answered. Pace is the secret of the director's art. Now, the question that Griffith formulates is that this essay can be summarized as follows. Is the pace of a movie sealed by being defined as fast or slow? Slow cinema, fast cinema. Or the space varies within the duration of one film? And if it does, then how? How is pace in the movies related to human biometrics, for instance, to the heartbeat of a person watching a show? And if so, does it mean that there is one universal recipe for pacing, or pacing may vary depending on what culture the movies belongs to, for instance, American or German? This is the question Griffith asks and answers, interestingly. Such is the range of scale of questions tackled in the movies, in pace in the movies. Now, Griffith's answer to the first question of this question is explicit. Must the movie be slow or fast throughout? No. Not only must the pace change as the movie unfolds, pace would be not pace unless it didn't. Griffith's essay proves this by assuming the opposite. If the picture says were made so that each scene contained the same number of scenes, contained the same or even approximately the same number of frames, the audience would drop into the land of naught. To escape this eventual result of monotonous repetition, the director is forced to vary the length of his so-called shots, whether he has some conception of pace or not. And a remarkable thing that the above assumption is exclusively numeric. No one is entitled, of course, to restrict Griffith's notion of pace to short lengths alone, but to rule them out would go against Griffith's own mandate. Throughout the essay, as in the above, Griffith talks about pace counting. Terms like number of frames is what Cinemetrics understands best, and this is how Griffith too interprets slow and fast when he says the pace must be quickened from beginning to end. Terms like climax, of course, may point in all directions and have been used by many to others to refer to dramatic tension. But when we read the action must quicken to a height in the minor climax, then slow down and build again to the next climax, which should be faster than the first, and so on. We know the formula has to do with speed, and yes, the speed of cutting. Pace in the movies must pick up and slow down in a continuously expanded sinusoid. Does Griffith consider this pace formula universal? Yes and no. And the "and no" is not to be ignored. Universal, yes, because Griffith bravely assumes the faster the pace of a movie, the quicker the pulse of a person watching it. And not universal and cultural, because it is up to the filmmaker whether to follow the pace of the human pulse or not. This is where the Germans come in. And I quote from Griffith: in the practical production of these climaxes, opinion is divided into two schools, but the human pulse beat as the criterion of pacing is perceived in both American and German school. The American school, and I described it in the way because it has been generally adopted in American films, makes an effort to keep the tempo of the picture in tune with the average human heartbeat, which of course increases in rapidity under such influences as excitement and may almost stop in moments of pregnant suspense. The other method, which may be called the German type because it has been widely deployed by German directors, slows the unfolding of the picture until the pulse races on ahead of it. So they undercut and the pulse races ahead. The American picture races ahead and the pulse rushes behind. Now, Griffith's view of on so labeled German films vis-a-vis his own is more complex than whatever critic like Seymour Stern could come up with. Unlike the latter, Griffith does not see this relationship as a contest. In fact, he has great esteem for Murnau, Lubitsch, and Dupont for the German pictures, and he says neither of the school, in Griffith's views, is better or worse than the other. Simply, each derives from a different movie viewing culture. The difference, to use Griffith's own words, is between living the story and watching it. Living a story is being in it. Such are American audiences which favor the picture paced with the beat of the heart. But sometimes more than a mere variation in the beat of a drama's rhythm divides the two schools. This is quotation from Griffith again. It involves the whole attitude in which the creation of a motion picture is approached. When the American school of pacing presents a film, it says to you, come and have a great experience. Whereas the German school says, come and see a great experience. Now, Liberty was an illustrated weekly. Now, the stills from two costume movies, one American, the other German, intended to illustrate Griffith's idea of two national paces in the movies, could hardly have been chosen better. One of these, showing horses galloping at full speed, carries that caption. It's on there, I quote from it. The famous chariot race from Ben-Hur, the type of pictures favored by Americans. Now, to the right, a still from Fritz Lang's The Nibelungen is showing a black forest and a white horse, its hooves in mist. The horse and horseman do not move. The caption says, a scene from Siegfried illustrating the type of pictures favored by Germans. Now, what other image, if not of horses, will better illustrate the concept of pace? That's my question. Now, that a question arose about the authorship of Pace in the Movies is due to a claim not made by Griffith's other essays. Pace in the movies must be counted, as we count steps as we dance, or pulse if we feel we danced too fast. To get the movie right, each sequence must be paced out. In fact, pulsed out. For the right pace of a film depends on the filmmaker's sense of pulse. Pace and pulse are twin terms that run through the whole of Griffith's essay. Both terms relate to speed, from slow to fast. But the main question is, the speed of what? Pace is the speed of cutting, namely, the rate with which consecutive shots succeed each other. As to pulse, what Griffith means by it is more elusive. When he claims the pace in the movies is a part of the pulse of life itself. Now, the word pulse takes on the mantle of philosophy. At other times, what pulse means is just pulse, a way to measure your heart rate while palpating an artery in your wrist, at your wrist. It is exactly this medical procedure to which Griffith suggests that we resort in case any of us becomes curious about what pace in the movies does to us film spectators. Now I quote, picture fans will find it, it's a recipe, picture fans will find it a fascinating pastime to measure their pulse beats with the pacing of motion pictures. Please don't try it the first time you view the film. Don't try it. give it a chance to interest and amuse and arouse you in your first visit. But when you go back, surrender yourself to the picture as you did at first. Then, when there's a quickened action, a climax of tension situation or a tense situation, feel your pulse and see if it isn't going about the same beat as the pace of the drama. You will find that it is, for the very good reason that the whole science of pace in the drama is founded upon your pulse. Now, was Griffith serious as he wrote this? Did he really see in his mind's eye a flesh and blood film going undertaking a self-test like this? Now, if Griffith did, then the layout editor working for Liberty clearly did, if Griffith didn't. Now, take a look at the headpiece that decorated the title piece, Pace in the Movies, as Griffith Essays appeared in the Liberty magazine. To the left of the title is a photograph showing a lovely profile of a young lady counting the rate of her pulse as she watches the show on the screen, an anamorphic screen on the right, exactly as Griffith instructs us to do. Planted by the Liberty editor at the prow of Griffith's printed essay, this pulse-counting beauty looks like a muse or figurehead of Cinemetrics. Yet the question arises, does what she is shown doing really qualify as counting? Now, call this an objection from semantics. Muses and figureheads are metaphorical creatures. A counting muse presents no exception. Numeric metaphors exist and must be told apart from numeric data. When my speedometer in a car says 40 miles per hour, it is data that I'm dealing with, but not when I open a 1914 issue of the Moscow-based Theater Gazette and read this in a review of Silent Witnesses, Bauer's, a perfectly unhurried Russian film. I quote from the review. Mr. Voznесensky and Bauer makes his drama move with deliberate slowness at a speed of no more than 40 kilometers per hour. Unquote. Numeric expression can function as verbal tropes, as when Shakespeare makes Hamlet prize his love for Ophelia above the quantity of love combined in 40,000 brothers. Conversely, verbal signs can serve as quantitative symbols, as when another classic, James Watt, used the word horse to quantify the power of an engine. Now, the main thing is not to confuse the two. Now, the semantic objection has a point. There are figures and figures, numeric figures, figurative ones, figures of speech, and figures of imagination. The figure of the pulse-palpating filmgoer conjured up in Pace in the Movies is a numeric ghost. She is a numeric ghost. What otherwise would have prevented Griffith from showing us some palpable data this mental experiment in pulse counting resulted in? It doesn't. But that a house is haunted does not entail it's not inhabited. From a numeric perspective, it hardly matters what price Prince Hamlet puts on his sentiment for the deceased fiancée, 40,000 or 70,000 brothers. Any sum is but a rhetorical equivalent of many. On the other hand, Hamlet is a plain verse, that is, in metric speech, which means that 40 brothers would be lacking 2 syllables to fill the iambic pentameter line, and 70,000 brothers would be 1 syllable too long. Unrestricted for the purpose of rhetoric, the number of brothers Shakespeare could and could not use was regulated by the economy of form. Pace in the Movies, science or fiction, this depends on whether we are looking at Griffith's rhetoric or his idea of film form. Pace in the Movies consists of 2 intertwined lines of argument, not one. One of these is concerned with the effect of pacing, what the well-chosen pace can do with the film viewer hearts and minds. This part is the space of Griffith's argument. This part, in the space of Griffith's argument, is occupied by fiction. Here, we are introduced to Griffith's pulse-counting spectator. It's fiction. Here, rhetoric cloaked in numbers rules. Now, the other line of argument, call it poetics, or the science of pace, as Griffith calls it, is about how pace is made. The poetics of pacing, distinct from the numeric rhetoric Griffith resorts to in order to sell pacing to the reader, is where numbers do what they do best, add up. And here I come to the conclusion, but slowly come to the conclusion, but to the fast conclusion. So don't worry, I remember the time. Now, cinema is intrinsically numeric. Every shot of a film must be of a certain length. Now, there is no way of escaping this fact. But there are ways of either ignoring this fact or factoring it into either filmmaking or the analysis of filmmaking. Now, that cinema is a numeric medium does not entail it is a metrical one. Films exist, indeed prevail, in which the length of a shot is largely decided by what this shot depicts. Lengths lengths of neighboring shots have no or little weight in this decision. On the other hand, where we find numbers, we often find numeric patterns. Why not try and trim shots so that neighboring shot lengths form regular patterns, just as words do in prosody or beats in music? Griffith, who knew his music and used it to write poems, even published one, was a likely filmmaker to ask himself this question. He did. It is from questions like that that Griffith's poetics of editing is growing. There are 3 tips a successful director will find it helpful to follow, Griffith says. Compose your film of many shorter scenes or shots, still a fresh coinage in 1926, rather than a few longer ones. Fast, not slow. Frequent shot changes can be wearisome and lull audiences to sleep, but only if your shots are of uniform length. Then I quote again literally Griffith. To escape this eventual result of monotonous repetition, the director is forced to vary the length of his so-called shots. I quoted already, but it's worth requoting. Whether he has any conception of pace or not, unquote. Shot length can vary and vary, very randomly or according to a plan. A numeric design, Griffith calls the director conception of pace. So it could randomly vary or follow the conception of pace, which is a numeric pattern. For instance, shot lengths can be timed as they do in music and in dance. Now, the following mock-up sequence from the Pace in the Movies, this is my, honestly, last points. The following mock-up sequence from Pace in the Movies illustrated a dance-derived conception of pace. Below is Griffith's, below, that is, above me, below on this paper, above me on the screen, in front of you, is Griffith's example verbatim and in full. The only change we made to the text, was to break down the mock-up scenes, shots, into separate paragraphs numbered 1 to 8. So this is the original. We just structured it a little without letting anything in. Now, what it begins with, and to illustrate that, the director desires to pace it in the rhythm of a waltz, or in scenes whose lengths are multiples of 3. And then he mocks up a sequence. Let us imagine a love scene. The director desires to pace it in the rhythm of a waltz, or in scenes whose lengths are multiple of 3. A boy and a girl seated on a stone wall beside a country road. The camera records them as full-length figures for a count perhaps of 6. 3 seconds, he says. Count 6, it's 3 seconds. Then the camera moves closer, picturing the boy talking earnestly with the girl for a count of 9. Placed closer still, the camera photographs the boy pleading with her for a count of 12. A close-up of the girl is made. She registers indifference. The count is 3, a second and a half, he says, the basic of the tempo. second and a half is 3. The camera turns back to the boy's troubled face for a count of 6. He swings down from the wall and the camera moves back to record this action, that action, for a count of 9. The girl is interested now. She watches the boy as he turns away from her. Count 6. Abruptly, he faces about and renews his pleading. The girl seems to be yielding. Such a scene would probably run to the count of 12 because of its importance. As we can see, Griffith's mental movie consists of 8 shots with 2 sets of values, nominal and numeric, assigned to each. The nominal scale is one of shot scales from long shot to medium long shots and medium shots to close-ups. What shot scale Griffith had in mind either follows, as it's shot 1/6 from his description, or can be ostensibly but reliably construed, like in shot 7 and 8 from the description. Since we are dealing with a mental, not real movie, we are entitled to a leeway, as we did, to co-assign mental values where Griffith's own thinking is not clear. In addition, each of these shots found in the mock-up comes with a numeric shot value assigned. Griffith's assigned figures come either in counts for all the 8s, or counts cum seconds for shot 1 and shot 4. So all the above can be summarized in this simple table. I'm not reading it, and I'm finishing shortly, I promise. Now, I have always found it necessary, he says, to depend entirely upon memory and judgments in this pacing of scenes, never having found a record charge which was simple or exact. Griffith complains in this. So he had to have those graphs in his mind and his memory as he was making film. He did not really, he was not really experienced very in statistics. But one is tempted to do what one is tempted to do now, was Griffith didn't then, particularly because his mock-up sequence, an artificial, out of his head example, is less fuzzy and chance-dependent than sequences from actual films we typically use to collect Cinemetrics data at. So this is the result. What this chart tells us may not be based on an adequate enough amount of data to get a true insight into Griffith's conception of pace, but may be good enough for an inkling, provided we were correct in hind-guessing what shot scales values Griffith might have assigned for shots 7 and 8. It may be of significance that the sequence starts and ends with a long scale shots 1 and 8. Nor is it fortuitous that an average length of a long scale shots for 0.5 seconds is higher than that of a close-ups 2.5 seconds. But the clearest thing to come out when we look at the graph in figure 3, that is here, is the peculiar character of rhythm. In choosing a pacing conception for this love story, Griffith says, I will use the rhythm of a waltz, making the length of my scenes multiple of 3. The multiple of 3 principle is indeed evident in the series of Griffith's count, 6, 9, 12, 3, 6, 9, 6, 12. On a higher level too, this triple structure of a pacing transpires if in the way bars grow and fall in this chart. To make it clearer, that's how they do. 1, 2, 3, and I'm a bad singer, a bad waltzer. I can see 1, 2, 3, 4, and 7, 8. So for a musician or for Leah, this could make better sense. Another way of rendering this might be fast, slow, fast. Fast, slower, slow. Faster, slower, slow. Slower, slow. To what extent, if at all, this pattern matches the rhythm of the waltz is hard to say to me. But it does look like a pattern falling and rising on the count of 3. I'm totally finished. I'm not putting my period yet, because what I want to say is that no, we're not. Our project is not about rhythm. The knowledge, the essence, the penetration into rhythm requires the knowledge of music that Leah has, and that Guido, whatever, who is the author of that French film, had. This is film and music. This film and many things. This is film, well, yes, and the pulse of the world. But what our project looks at is the numeric subhistory in the history of film. When they started counting, when Dziga Vertov looked at Griffith, said, hey, and another musician, hey, this guy is actually counting, I feel there is a pattern in it, and starts counting his own shots, creates his movies, so I'm like you, jumping countries, not ages yet, and saying that, yeah, there are people who would say, oh, if Vertov counted, if Gabel-Gans counted, if Eisenstein counted, why should I? Doesn't matter. I think it matters. And there could be a history, a numeric history, a numerate history, with then as a chapter or as a longitudinal section of a bigger film history. A longitudinal section, that's why we're looking, Cinemetrics looks at Griffith, because Griffith looked at us.